The letter arrived on a Thursday, which Cressida Lorne would later think was fitting. Nothing good had ever happened to her on a Thursday. She was standing in the kitchen of her cousin's house in Edinburgh, pretending to scrub a pot she had already scrubbed twice when the housekeeper brought it in. The woman set it on the table without a word and left. Cressida looked at it for a long moment before she picked it up. The seal was her brother's. She already knew what it said before she opened it. She had known, in the way you know a storm is coming before the first cloud appears, for 3 months now, since Hartley had started arriving home after midnight, smelling of whiskey and other men's cigars. Since the household accounts stopped making sense. Since their mother's pearl earrings disappeared from the dressing table, and Hartley had claimed, with a face entirely too composed, that he had sent them to be clean. The letter was brief. Hartley had always been brief when there was nothing kind to say. The house must be let. The estate is encumbered. I have made arrangements. You are to present yourself at Aldenmere by the 14th. His Grace the Duke of Ravenswood has agreed to take you on as a companion to his aunt. I suggest you be grateful. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it, tucked it into her apron pocket, and finished scrubbing the pot. She was not, Cressida told herself, surprised. Thornfield Park had been in the Lorne family for 4 generations. Her grandfather had built the east wing. Her mother had planted the rose garden along the south wall, and every summer of Cressida's childhood, the smell of it had come through her bedroom window like something out of a dream. She had learned to ride in the lower paddock. She had scraped her knees on the gravel drive, climbed the oak tree by the folly, read half the library in the window seat overlooking the moors. It was hers. It had always been hers, except that it wasn't, legally. It had been Hartley's from the moment their father died, and Hartley, who had charm enough to fill a room and sense enough to fill a thimble, had spent 4 years turning a modest debt into something catastrophic. Cressida did not know the exact figure. She was fairly certain she did not want to. What she knew was this: Hartley had sold her, not in the way their father had sold cattle, not in the way her grandfather had sold timber rights. But the principle was the same. She was 26, unmarried, without income or property, and her brother had found someone willing to take her off his hands in exchange for what, exactly? She did not know. She was not sure knowing would help. The Duke of Ravenswood. She had heard the name before, the way you hear the names of mountains you have never climbed. He owned land from the Borders to the Cairngorms. He sat in the Lords when it suited him. He had a reputation for being difficult, which in her experience meant he was either genuinely unpleasant or simply not interested in performing pleasantness for people who had not earned it. She did not know which. She had a fortnight to find out. The morning she left Edinburgh, her cousin Marjorie stood in the doorway and watched her pack with an expression caught between guilt and relief. They both understood what it was. Marjorie had 3 children and a husband who barely tolerated Cressida's presence at the best of times. There was no real place for her there. There had never been a real place for her anywhere since Thornfield. "You could write to me," Marjorie said. "I will," Cressida said, and meant it, and knew Marjorie would not write back. She took the train north from Edinburgh on a gray November morning, the kind of gray that was not dramatic but simply relentless, the color of something that had given up trying. She had 1 trunk, a carpet bag, and a volume of essays she had already read twice and brought because it was the only book she owned that was not still at Thornfield in the library that was no longer hers. Aldenmere was 3 miles from the nearest station. The Duke had sent a carriage, which told her nothing about his character and everything about his sense of propriety. It was a good carriage, well-maintained, well-horsed, the driver polite if silent. She watched the landscape change as they moved north, the fields giving way to moorland, the horizon widening, the sky pressing down lower and colder. She had been to this part of Scotland once, as a child, with her father. She remembered thinking it looked like the edge of the world. She remembered loving it for that. She tried not to think about that now. Aldenmere appeared around a bend in the road, without warning, the way large things sometimes do. It was enormous. That was her first thought. Not elegant, or impressive, or beautiful, simply enormous. A great pale stone pile set against a hillside, with the permanence of something that had grown there rather than been built. The windows caught what little light the afternoon had left. The ground stretched in every direction, frost brown and wide. She straightened her spine and reminded herself who she was. She was Cressida Lorne, daughter of Sir Edmund Lorne of Thornfield Park, educated at home by a mother who had read Latin and Greek for pleasure, and had seen no reason her daughter should not do the same. She was here as a companion, yes. She was here because her brother had left her no other choice, yes. But she had not stopped being herself. She intended to remember that. The housekeeper met her at the door, a tall woman, spare and precise, with iron-gray hair, and the manner of someone who had managed large households for so long that management had become her natural expression. She introduced herself as Mrs. Calloway. "His Grace is not at home this evening," Mrs. Calloway said. "He extends his apologies and asks that you make yourself comfortable. Lady Dunmore is expecting you." Lady Dunmore was the aunt. Cressida had been given to understand that the position of companion had been created specifically for this woman, who was 63, recently widowed, and according to Hartley's letter, which had been vague on details and shorter on compassion than a letter about a person's entire future probably ought to be, in need of company and assistance. She found Lady Dunmore in the small sitting room off the east corridor, a woman wrapped in shawls and surrounded by correspondence in a state of magnificent disorder. She was small, bird-like, with eyes the color of winter sky and a sharpness about her that suggested the shawls were comfort rather than infirmity. "Sit down," Lady Dunmore said before Cressida had finished crossing the threshold. "You're taller than I expected. Hartley said you were sensible." "Are you? I hope so," Cressida said. "Hoping is not the same as being." But Lady Dunmore's eyes had a glint in them that might have been approval. "Can you read aloud without going flat? My last companion had a voice like a gate hinge. Perfectly pleasant woman, but I could not bear it for more than 10 minutes. I've been told I read reasonably well. We'll see. Sit down," I said. Cressida sat. That first week she did not see the Duke at all. She learned the house instead, the way you learn a place when you are living in it rather than visiting. The particular creak of the third step on the east staircase, the way the wind found the gap in the library window on cold nights, which rooms the light reached in the morning and which stayed dark until noon. She read to Lady Dunmore every afternoon. She helped manage her correspondence, which was extensive and chaotic, filled with letters from friends, from charitable organizations, from tradespeople, from distant relations who wrote to inquire about her health and were transparently more interested in their prospects. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, managing things, keeping order, noticing what needed doing before it was asked. At Thornfield she had run the household from the age of 17 after their mother fell ill, while Hartley charmed guests and spent money, and assumed that because nothing fell apart visibly, nothing required effort. The thought made something tighten in her chest. She put it away. She was here now. She would manage here. The Duke arrived on a Friday without announcement, the way he apparently did everything. She heard the horses in the yard, heard the change in the house that happens when someone with authority enters it, the small adjustments in the staff, a slight collective straightening. She was in the library when Mrs. Calloway came to find her. "His Grace will take dinner at 7, Mrs. Calloway said. "He has requested that you join him and Lady Dunmore." Cressida looked up from the household ledger she had been organizing, because Lady Dunmore had asked her to, and because it had been in a state that made her palms itch. Of course. She dressed carefully. Not elaborately. She did not have the wardrobe for elaborate, but carefully, because there was a difference, and it mattered. The gray wool was presentable. Her hair was neat. She looked, she thought, like what she was, a woman of some education and no current fortune, employed in a respectable capacity, not trying to be anything other than what the situation required. He was already in the dining room when she arrived. She had expected, she realized afterward, something easier to dismiss. Someone older or softer or more obviously unpleasant, someone she could look at and file neatly under "not my concern." The Duke of Ravenswood was none of those things. He was perhaps 35, dark, with the kind of stillness that in another man might have seemed idle, but in him seemed like something deliberately contained. He rose when she entered, which she had not expected, and looked at her in a way that was assessing without being rude. "Miss Lorne," he said, "Your Grace." Lady Dunmore swept in 3 minutes later, and immediately began talking about a letter she had received from a friend in Bath, and the potential awkwardness of the first dinner resolved itself in the way most awkwardness does, by being overtaken by something more immediate. But Cressida was aware of him across the table, aware of the way he listened, which was more careful than she had expected, aware that he asked her, twice, for her opinion on things Lady Dunmore had raised. The drainage project on the North Estate, the proposed renovation of the tenants' cottages, and that when she gave it, he did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, as though he had expected exactly that quality of answer, and was simply confirming it. She was not sure what to do with that. Over the following weeks, she settled into something like a rhythm. Mornings with the correspondence, afternoons reading to Lady Dunmore, evenings, when the Duke was present, which was not always, at dinner, where the conversation ranged from Scottish land reform to Lady Dunmore's memories of the Queen's coronation to, once, memorable, the correct way to treat a horse with a stone bruise, on which topic Cressida had more to say than she had anticipated, and the Duke had listened with an expression she could not read. She told herself she was comfortable, she was warm, she was housed, she was doing work she was competent at. Lady Dunmore was exacting but not unkind, and had begun, in small ways, to show something that might have been genuine affection. The sharing of small family jokes, the telling of stories she said she hadn't told anyone in years. But Thornfield was still there, in the background of everything. Some mornings she woke, thinking she was there, and the first few seconds before the room came into focus had a particular quality of grief she had no other name for. She had not told anyone here the full truth of how she had come to be at Aldenmere, that she was not merely a woman seeking respectable employment, that she was the daughter of Sir Edmund Lorne, that Thornfield Park, which was less than 40 miles from where she currently stood, was her home, and had been taken from her by a brother's debts she had had no part in making. She had not told anyone, which was why what happened on the afternoon of the 22nd of November was so completely unexpected. She had gone to the estate office to return a set of ledgers she had been organizing for Mrs. Calloway. She had thought the room was empty. It was not. The Duke was at the desk, reading. He looked up when she entered, and she began the ordinary apology for disturbing him, and then stopped, because on the desk beside him, visible in the afternoon light, was a letter. She would not have registered it, except that she knew the handwriting. She knew it because she had grown up watching it, because it was the hand that had signed her allowance and her birthday letters, and finally, the letter she had received on a Thursday that had changed everything, her brother's handwriting. The Duke followed her gaze. He did not pretend not to see what she was looking at. "You know that hand," he said. It was not a question. She considered lying. She had been managing this particular truth for 6 weeks, and she was practiced at the evasion. But there was something in the way he said it, not accusing, simply certain, that made the lie feel more exhausting than the truth. "He is my brother," she said. A silence. The fire in the grate made its small sounds. "Sit down, Miss Lorne," the Duke said, not unkindly. She sat. He told her what was in the letter. Not all of it, she suspected. There were things in his expression that he was choosing not to say, but enough. Hartley had written to him 6 weeks ago proposing the arrangement. He had framed it as placing his sister in suitable employment. The Duke had agreed because Lady Dunmore had genuinely needed someone, and because, and here he paused in a way she could not interpret, he had made certain inquiries about Miss Lorne of Thornfield Park and had been satisfied by what he learned. "You knew who I was," she said. "When I arrived, I knew your name and your circumstances. Yes, and you said nothing." "You said nothing either." He was not unkind about it. He was simply accurate. She thought about that for a moment. Outside the window, the sky was the color of pewter, flat and cold. A line of trees along the North Drive stood bare against it. "My brother does not own me," she said finally, "whatever arrangement he communicated to you." "No," the Duke said, "he doesn't. I am here as an employee, in a professional capacity. That is the entirety of what I agreed to. That is the entirety of what I offered," he said. "Nothing more." She looked at him. He looked back at her steadily, the way he had on that first evening, the way she had not yet found a way to classify. "Then we understand each other," she said. "We do," he said. "I hope." She left the office carrying the empty ledgers and went back to Lady Dunmore's sitting room and sat for a moment in the chair by the fire before the old woman arrived, and let herself feel, briefly, the thing she had been not feeling for 6 weeks, which was that she was entirely alone in a situation she had not chosen, in a house that was not hers, in a life that had been determined by her brother's failures, and that no amount of competence or composure was going to change the fundamental fact of that. Then Lady Dunmore arrived and asked her to read the 3rd chapter of a rather long novel, and Cressida read it, and her voice was steady throughout. She did not know what she had expected from the conversation in the office. Some change, perhaps. Something explicit. What happened instead was subtler and, in some ways, harder to hold in her hands. The Duke began including her. Not in any way she could have objected to. Nothing was inappropriate. Nothing overstepped what was proper. But he began, in small deliberate ways, to treat her as though her opinion had weight. He asked for her thoughts on the estate accounts, when she mentioned she had noticed a discrepancy. He sent her a book from the library without explanation, one on land management she had mentioned in passing 3 weeks prior. He told her, in the same tone he used to tell the solicitor things, that the matter of Thornfield was not closed. She did not know what that meant. She did not ask. December came in hard and cold. The hills around Aldenmere turned white and stayed white, the kind of winter that settled in and made itself comfortable. The household contracted around warmth. Fires in every room, heavier curtains. The smell of bread and soup from the kitchen drifting through the house on cold mornings. Cressida had, against everything she would have predicted, begun to feel something almost like peace. Not happiness. She was not going to claim happiness, but a kind of rightness in the daily shape of things. Lady Dunmore, who was funny and sharp and occasionally outrageous, had become genuinely dear to her. The staff, who had been politely watchful in the beginning, had relaxed into something warmer. Mrs. Calloway had started asking her opinion on household decisions, which Cressida suspected was a form of approval Mrs. Calloway would never make explicit. And the Duke. She did not think about the Duke. She specifically did not think about the way he had handed her down from the carriage on the occasion of Lady Dunmore's birthday outing, or the way he had looked at her when she made a dry remark about the novel they had all been discussing at dinner, or the way he had said her name, Miss Lorne, as though it was something he was paying attention to rather than simply deploying. She specifically did not think about any of that. It was the solicitor who changed things. He arrived on the 9th of December, a thin, precise man named Mr. Forsyth, who had the manner of someone accustomed to delivering unpleasant news with perfect courtesy. He came ostensibly on estate business. He stayed for 2 days. On the second day, Cressida happened to be crossing the hall when the library door was not quite shut, and she heard her own name. She stopped. She was not, in general, the kind of person who listened at doors. She was also not the kind of person who had ever had to be, because until 4 years ago her life had been largely transparent. She had known what was happening in it and why, because she had been running most of it herself. She stood in the hall for a moment. Then she went to find Lady Dunmore. The old woman was at her correspondence, but she looked up when Cressida entered, and something in her face changed. "Sit down, my dear," Lady Dunmore said. It was the first time she had called her that. "What do you know?" Cressida asked. Lady Dunmore folded her hands. "More than I've been asked to share, which I have found a rather uncomfortable position. Your brother has made certain proposals." "What proposals?" It was not, in the end, complicated. It was, in fact, exactly the kind of thing that was not complicated once you saw it plainly, which was perhaps why it had been so carefully obscured. Hartley had not simply placed her in employment. Hartley had written to the Duke 6 weeks before her arrival proposing a more permanent arrangement, using as currency the thing he had no right to use, Cressida herself. The position of companion was a pretext. The real offer had been a marital one, with the Lorne name, such as it still was, and the prospect of Thornfield, if it could be recovered, as inducement. The Duke, according to Lady Dunmore, had declined. Not the arrangement with Cressida, the arrangement with Hartley. He had refused to deal with Hartley as a party. He had said that if there was to be any understanding of any kind, it would be made by Cressida herself, and by no one else, and only after she had been here long enough to know her own mind. Cressida sat with that for a moment. "He told you this," she said. "He told me this," Lady Dunmore said. "Because he is not, despite considerable evidence to the contrary, a man who does things without telling someone. He told me. I'm telling you. And Hartley, your brother is under the impression that negotiations are ongoing." Lady Dunmore said this with a precision that was its own form of contempt. "He is incorrect." Outside the window the snow was falling again, soft and unhurried, covering the grounds of Aldenmere in something that looked, from inside a warm room, almost like grace. Cressida thought about Thornfield, about the rose garden, about the window seat, about the oak tree. She thought about a man who had looked at her from across a dinner table, as though her opinions were worth hearing, and had left a book outside her door without making anything of it, and had said, in an estate office on a gray afternoon, simply, "He doesn't own you." "Where is he?" she said. "The East Library," Lady Dunmore said. "He's been there all morning." She found him by the fire, which seemed right. He was standing rather than sitting, with the manner of someone who had been trying to work and had not been able to. He looked up when she came in. She did not sit down this time. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at him and said, "Lady Dunmore told me. I thought she might." "You refused my brother's terms." "I did." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. Outside, the snow was still falling. "Because you are not a term," he said. "You are a person, and whatever understanding exists between us, if any exists, it will be one you choose freely or it will not exist at all." She had spent 6 weeks being composed. She had been composed on the Thursday the letter arrived, composed on the train north, composed at the dinner table, and in the estate office, and in Lady Dunmore's sitting room. She had been composed because composure was what she had. It was the thing she had learned to carry instead of the things she no longer had. She was not, at this exact moment, composed. "I want Thornfield," she said. "I know that is not a romantic declaration. I am telling you there is something you should know about my motivations." "I know that too." There was something in his face she had not seen before, or had seen and not allowed herself to name. "I also know that you have been managing that estate from 40 miles away in your head since you arrived, and that you read to my aunt with more care than most people bring to anything, and that you noticed the discrepancy in the North Quarter accounts that 2 solicitors missed, and that you are standing in this room telling me things you don't have to tell me because you think honesty is worth more than strategy." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is it?" she said. "Worth more than strategy?" "In my experience," he said, "it is the only thing that keeps." Thornfield was recovered. Not immediately, not simply. There were legal complexities and debts, and a conversation with Hartley that Cressida was not present for, but which the Duke attended alone, and which she gathered from his expression afterward had been definitive. There was a period of 6 weeks during which the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and Cressa slept badly and did not let anyone see that she was sleeping badly. But it was recovered. She was standing in the rose garden when she heard, finally. February now, the garden bare, the canes cut back to nothing, the beds covered against the frost. The house behind her was hers again, in every way it ought to have been from the beginning. The Duke had ridden from Aldenmere that morning, which was 2 hours north, because he had wanted to tell her himself, and not in a letter. "It's done," he said. She stood in the middle of the garden her mother had planted and felt something she did not have a precise word for, something that was grief and relief and anger and gratitude all at once, pressing against her ribcage like weather. "Thank you," she said when she could. He nodded. He did not make anything of it. They stood there for a moment in the bare garden, in the cold February light, and she thought, here is a man who refused to purchase what should never have been for sale, who had waited, who had said he doesn't own you in a tone that meant he believed it, and had acted accordingly. "I will need to be at Thornfield for some time," she said. "There is a great deal to put right. I know Lady Dunmore is entirely capable of managing without you for a while," he said. "She will be very put out about it. She would not forgive me if I suggested otherwise." She almost smiled. "And Aldenmere." He looked at her. "Aldenmere will be here," he said, "when you're ready." She understood what he was offering, not a rescue, not a transaction. Something quieter and more honest than either, a direction, when she had finished the work that was hers to finish first. The rose canes were bare and gray. In 4 months they would be green. In 6 they would be covered in the same deep red blooms she had smelled through her window every summer of her childhood. The garden had survived Hartley's neglect, the cold, the absence of anyone who had known what it was. "Some things," she thought, "do. When I'm ready," she said, and the words felt, for the first time in a very long time, like they belonged to her.